The thing we're seeing for sure is that everything's more competitive. There's a lot of different concepts available to the consumer. The opportunity is for these studios to stand out is in the experience.
Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Gym Break Cast, where we just kind of sit down and go through all those visionary and integrator type ideas that come to us during our normal daily gym break. Today I have a special guest. Why don't you introduce yourself?
Thanks, Zach. Tessa here from Pipeline Solutions.
Beautiful, beautiful. Why don't you tell everyone a little bit about Pipeline and what you guys do over there?
Yeah, absolutely. So we help boutique fitness studio owners, operators from single location all the way up to dozens or hundreds of studios keep on top of their data, their KPIs to drive growth and retention through essentially actionable analytics and insights.
Yeah, well, I kind of took a look through your site a little bit about what you do. So why don't you tell everyone? I know you were an athlete as well, so why don't you tell everyone a little bit about your story and what drives you and the company and your vision towards helping these studio owners?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Zach. Once an athlete, always an athlete. I like to think that I'm not quite a was, but I'm just, maybe getting into the master's category of being an athlete at this point in time. But for the most part, where this comes from is from that experience of owning and operating studios ourselves. So as mentioned, I got into this world through mainly group fitness training, being a coach. Prior to that, played NCAA D1 softball in South Carolina. And once you do that, I think fitness is kind of always going to be part of your world. So that's kind of how I got into, getting my certifications and wanting to continue to help people and have that be part of my everyday and getting into kind of the boutique fitness space, just because that coming from a team sport, that class feel is hard to replicate by yourself. So for me, being in classes and doing that kind of coaching and being in that environment was really, I was drawn to it. And then my co-founder, John, is a multi-location studio owner. And, everything that we built is from the inside out. It's from needs that we saw in his studios and operationally things that were challenging at the time. And my background being in fitness was of course helpful, and then just out of curiosity I kind of got into software development about 10 years ago as well. So the two came together and kind of here we are with Pipeline, and it's evolved a lot for sure over the last few years, but that's kind of our origin story.
That's wonderful. That's great to hear. What one thing that you kind of just brought up there, which will lead to kind of our first topic here, is the concept of how you got into the software development like 10 years ago, but you were also a personal trainer yourself, and you were in fitness and you were an athlete. I'm very big. My wife's a family trauma therapist. I like to go off the color wheels on different types of personalities. Being a business owner, we deal with the culture index, all that stuff to hire and culture and all that fun stuff. I've tended to see a very big pain point within the industry that there's not too many people that have that double-sided personality, right?
Mhm.
It's a very much spontaneous slash, hey, I'm gonna set these goals. As an athlete, I think that we all, at least one point or another in our lives, even with opening a studio,
Mhm.
get to the point where we're like, hey, like we learn that long-term gratification, like we have to set a goal, like for instance, to win a Super Bowl or win a championship. And our
Mhm.
short-term goals are usually like, all right, this is going to just be 1% towards getting there. But it takes a long time, a year, 2 years, sometimes 5 years, and even 10 if you're going professional and your goal is like a 15-year goal, right? And then you have
Mhm.
the technical side, which I'm a very much a technical expert myself, where we can dive into the operations and the technical coding and all that stuff. I feel like those two personality types are a great combination, but you have to learn to use them correctly, because if not, it's very easy to get caught in one and then burnt
Mhm.
out without utilizing the other. And so to my first question for you and what you have seen and kind of where you have pushed this, you talk a lot about data-driven operations. And so I think that plays very heavily into your personalities of what you've seen other studios go through as they tend to evolve. So can you explain to me a little bit how you came up with this solution for your studios and how it benefits, maybe even from a personality type
Mhm.
setup?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. No, it's a great question, Zach. I think to your point, we have a lot of owners, operators in this space that, come from that fitness, that love of fitness or wellness, personal development, coaching, all those things are really great. But of course, business operations are just a different skill set and it requires different tools. And it's not to say that they're mutually exclusive by any means. I think to your point, you get, phenomenal operators who are using both together to kind of drive those outcomes that they're looking for. And so for us, what that means is, we often get a lot of, or we often have a lot of conversations with operators or owners that do a lot of things on, their gut feel, their gut instincts, what they've done in the past, how they've, kind of grown to the point that they're at. And the tricky part there is that's great. We wouldn't say don't listen to your gut. It's done you very well. But at a certain point, if you're looking to scale and grow, that's where, data insights are going to provide that extra information or that extra kind of support with where you think you need to go, right? So, in a very practical sense, oftentimes what we'll see are, owners or operators really try to double down on their ad spend or their marketing to push people, get people into the studio. If we can just get them in the door, we can convert them. That type of kind of thinking, and while that may be true, and I'm sure it's happened for them in the past, where we can get really granular with it is, well, if we're looking at your conversion rates of every part of your funnel, is it lead to booked? Is it booked to visit? Is it visit to member? Like what part of the, kind of trial or journey is actually not where we want it to be? Because it's not the whole thing. Typically, it's not the whole thing. Typically, studios have actually a decent conversion rate somewhere along the line, and it's just bottlenecking or breaking down at a certain point. And the hard part, of course, is, adding fuel to a fire that's just going to burn out, or you're not really going to get the most out of it because one part of this process is actually kind of broken. And that's where data, comes into play. And that's where it has a lot of power, is in supporting the types of things or the decisions and actions that you think need to happen. And sometimes it will tell you otherwise, which is also great. Before you kind of go down this one path and double down on it, well, let's check the numbers. What's happening here? What's going on with our attendance? Like, we think we should shift our schedule. Well, let's look at the numbers. Which services are coming in on which days? Our unlimited members, attending these specific classes versus maybe a class pass or a class pack member. And that's where you can use, that data to really drive that next step. But oftentimes as well, where it really helps is you might not know exactly what that next right move is. And what we help do just with the platform itself, but also through a lot of our educational content is, coach towards where to look for that next right move and then support it with, of course, the insights of your team, the insights that you have, but also use that data to back up, what to do next.
Yeah, when I usually talk to the studio owners, it's usually something along the lines of, hey, we're spending all of our hours creating these challenges. The owner thinks that they're bigger than they are. Nothing against them, but they're usually just too small to really think about strategy yet. They're still in validation mode, right? But they're at this point where they're like, we're doing all these challenges, and every single time it's usually the same. I get the same answer. I'm like, well, what's your conversion rate like with all these hours and spend you're spending on social media versus the people that just walk into the door and they're like, oh, well, it's 50% over here and it's like 5 to 10% over here. And I'm like, then why aren't you looking at those numbers and kind of focusing on what works instead of continuing to spend man hours and time on something that does work, but just the conversion's not as great? Why?
Right.
You know, and
Yeah.
those hours are and like you're saying, with being able to look at numbers and see what's working and track certain things, really at the end of the day, from an operations standpoint, helps you put your hours towards the things that are more effective.
Absolutely. And your team's hours, right? Like
Mhm.
it means that, I think as well, what it helps to do is really delineate between, to your point, what's working and what isn't, or what we can try. What can we test? What can we, maybe run an experiment with? And when you have specific metrics, then you can essentially have part of your team or have someone on your team or yourself own that metric. And it just becomes now, okay,
Mhm.
if someone's ready, willing, they want to own the low engagement metric and move that number. Let's get, our low engagement number from 8% of our members down to 5% of our members. Cool. Now you own that. Now we can create a playbook for that activity and try and tackle that single metric instead of it being kind of this amorphous idea of, we need to have better retention, right? Like that's the big idea. Okay, well, now how do we go do that? Well, let's
Yeah.
look at these three metrics and then we can take ownership over those. And now we can start to create actions around very, very specific things that are going to move the needle for the location. And that can be across multiple locations as well.
Well, and I see a bigger pain point there that it really helps in rationale. I mean, I think us as techie people, I think that we can kind of say, hey, how do we back engineer this metric? And it's very easy to go in and say, for us, for instance, because we have certain trackable metrics in the marketing and the online stuff, that I could say, okay, retention, we need to get down. How do we look at the other numbers and move down? And backward engineering, it's the key form of technology, right? How do we back engineer anything? And within the studio space, it does make it a lot harder because you have a lot more people, especially with your operations and what you're doing, can't necessarily write down how a person's going to go over here and do this and then go over there and do that. And so you need to find a way to have certain metrics in place to be able to basically back engineer what you're trying to do.
Absolutely. And then the beauty of it is now you're talking about a math problem, right? So to your point, it takes a little bit of that. Don't get me wrong, there's always going to be some nuance and some things in here. But if we're talking about reverse engineering, now it becomes a numbers game, right? And when you're getting into solving a math problem, it does become a little bit easier because then you can understand like, okay, based on our, for example, the marketing example, based on our actual conversion rates right now, if we added 200 new leads, this is what we would expect at the end of that journey, right? And now we're just talking about math and not hoping that, hey, if we spend X amount of dollars and get 200 new leads, we should, quote unquote, convert 100 of them, right? Well, the conversion rates are showing right now that actually, if you did that, you might only convert 40 of them, right? And now it becomes, to your point, like ROI on that ad spend. Does that make sense? Maybe we shore up other parts of our operations first before we dive into something like that. And plugging those numbers in does allow you to reverse engineer the outcomes, which then become, the drivers of the next action.
Yeah, and I think that it's very crucial, especially for studio owners that are probably, still under $1 million and they don't have multiple locations yet, because they have to start learning that's during the time when, you look at certain situations like strategy and how much of an impact it actually does to do what you just said. Let's look at this and goal set a specific way so that we can see what's working. I've also seen it, just a very big trend in the industry, brand performance. Like, how do you track certain things? Like, I could go off of the basic of, visuals and visual communication, but how do you track smell and sounds and all those other things that are very hard to track?
Yeah, absolutely. When you said that, I was like, "Ooh, that sounds difficult."
It does. It does. There will eventually be a way, but it just goes to show you that the strategy, that is kind of the strategy, right? Like being able to, and that's what I always try to push across to think and mindset and the mental growth of these studio owners. Like, hey, it's not about you, just like you said, throwing $1,000 more at this ad campaign or hiring another person to call 1 million people. Like, you are going to start to get to the point where the smallest increment in change can have a drastic impact on members. Like you said, retention
Absolutely.
rate. Like, hey, let's look down and just see, all right, are we giving them a handshake when they come into the door? And I'm just using vague things off the top of my head, but are we doing stuff like that? How many handshakes are we giving? How many reviews? And here's a good trackable one. How many reviews are we getting from our existing members? How is that playing a role in the KPI and growth of new members? Like,
Yep,
but
absolutely.
how do you feel within the studio space and with what you've seen and your platform and what you guys do? How do you feel it helps with building stronger studio teams?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think a big part of it is alignment, right? And having everyone be on the same page of what we're working towards. And and a bit of transparency around that, right? And there's ways to do it. Not necessarily everybody on your team needs to see all the revenue metrics and things like that. And we have access levels on our platform to address those things. But at the same time, we're definitely firm believers in having as much of the data available to the team as possible so that they know what they're working towards and how that is affecting the growth of the business, right? From a sales side, from a retention side, or anything like that. It's one thing to say those things. It's another thing to have the studio teams able to log in and see those numbers and see them moving daily, right? And not just having that once a month or once every 6 weeks or maybe once every 2 months staff meeting. And now everybody's that much further behind moving that metric because they're only learning about it down the road and it becomes much more reactive. So if we can get the team aligned on a lot of the KPIs, get them into the routine of, as I mentioned before, if somebody owns that metric or if you have certain team members looking after certain parts of the operations, getting into that routine and that rhythm of those checks, checking in, what can we do this week to move that number, testing, experimenting, and just really buying into what it is that we're trying to do as a business. And a big part of that too, which I haven't touched on, is, from the leadership standpoint, that mission and vision of the studio, which, is talked about typically in other types of businesses. I know that it's not really necessarily a big thing at the SMB or, kind of smaller business level with mission, vision, values. It's kind of a bit more of an enterprise type of wording, but realistically, it translates across any business of any size. If we have team members that know what we're about, as a studio concept, as a brand, it gets, it does get bigger and bigger. But even at your single studio, it's like, let your team in on the big secret. Why did you open this place? What are the goals? What are we trying to do here? So that they can become bought into that vision and become part of it. I'm a very, very firm believer in having high standards and those standards attracting the people that you want to be in your location, in your studio, and not the opposite, right? It's going to attract the people that want to be there, and the people that don't are not going to be drawn to what you're doing. And so, if we can set those standards high, we can have that buy in on what we're trying to achieve here. And it could be as simple as, look, we want to be the best offering of our modality in our city, right? Or in our region or in the world, right? That's when we're getting into brand concepts. That's totally fine. Whatever that vision is, make sure it's clear so that people understand on your team what they're working towards. And then we can layer in the data on top of that to keep everybody aligned and on that same page, because now it has a lot more meaning and it has special meaning to them because they're a part of something special and something big.
Yeah, a couple things I want to touch on there. I'm a very big preacher on vision, values. I think
Yeah.
it's I definitely think it's something in this industry that is missed. Back to literally that what the thought that was going through my head when you mentioned leadership is I was literally about to say how leadership has somewhat moved away in the fitness space. You have the owners, and then you start hiring management, and then management, they don't feel like their leadership mentality, and times have changed. We
Yeah.
come to a point where the studio space, boutique, it even, I mean, can say big box as well. I mean, all of them have become more of a situation. I think people are still preaching at this, hey, I want to do everything online. I want to help people at home, which it still has its place. But I mean, I think people that are starting to work from home are starting to realize, like, I need my place, my community. I need a place to go. And the best way to do that is to leverage your vision, not just from your employee standpoint, but from your member standpoint,
Yeah.
right? And
Mm.
times have changed. People want to work at places they value, and places. It's not always about money. Of course, money is important, but they want to
Mhm.
work with people that and so that goes into the other retention side, like retention of your employees, right? And I'm a very big advocacy on me seeing studios of certain sizes, like, all right, when is the perfect time that you need to start focusing on vision? When is the perfect
Yeah.
time you need to start, focusing on consistency and alignment and all that stuff? And it goes back to what we talked about earlier with, those small impactful changes. And usually I do usually think that mindset shift for individual studio owners happens around 500K. I'd say 3 to 500, depending on
Mhm.
the luxury of their membership. But I also see a lot of them getting stuck in validation mode. Back to what you said, like, let's just throw more ad spend out that's not realizing that it's not cost effective anymore, or hiring front desk people to call everyone in the neighborhood, right?
Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
so let's talk a little bit, because this is a great topic to lean on here, is differentiating yourself in the market. Like we just talked about branding a little bit and branding initiatives. I'm a very big component of how differentiating yourself is all about. It's more of a branding solution, not necessarily a marketing solution. And so, what are you seeing right now in the market, especially with all the micro gyms starting to come out and be a fad? You still have the big box, which for some reason the boutique studios are trying to imitate, even though they, are a different price model. What are you seeing right now in the space, and with what you guys are doing to help these studios in the boutique market really differentiate themselves from their competition?
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's a great question. It's the thing we're seeing for sure is that everything's more competitive, right? Especially in boutique, it's much more competitive than it was 4 or 5 years ago. There's a lot of different concepts available to the consumer, and everyone is, while they are maybe non-competitive as modalities, they're all competitive for wallet share, right? There's only a certain amount of things that somebody's going to do, and it just, yeah, so there could be, that yoga Pilates studio next to the hit studio, across from the recovery and wellness side of things, and all of those things are great. Like, I've obviously no issue with any of those things, but if we then stack all of those things together, how much time and money is going into that for the average person? It can end up being quite a bit. And so I think where the differentiator is, and where the opportunity is for these studios to stand out, is in the experience. Um, and really driving home that it still comes down to what happens on the floor more than anything. If somebody comes to those stores and, they have an idea of what they're getting into, and what you offer, to me, retention starts ahead of even that very first class, right? Retention is the promise you've made to this person who saw your ad, or, walked by the location physically, and they got intrigued, right? And they've taken that first step or that first action to come in and try out what's going on. And so I believe that the main differentiators are coming from studios and concepts that are delivering the best experience that they possibly can. I wholeheartedly believe that every class is an opportunity for a world class experience. And the brands and concepts that are doubling down on that and are bringing in top talent to deliver those classes are going to see, a difference in growth. And it can't just come down to automation for automation's sake. All the texts, all the emails, all of those things are really great. Don't get me wrong. They save owners and operators time, especially in a high touch place like boutique. But at the end of the day, that person is going to stay because of the experience that they are receiving, and the promise of the result that they originally came in for. So if we can deliver a exceptional experience and show in as short amount of time as possible that, hey, the thing that you came to us for, we're promising we're going to deliver that to you, whether that's in, 30 days, 90 days, 6 months, 12 months, it's coming, I promise. So, it's a little bit less of just the, like, data connection to those things, and a bit more of the human connection to those things. But where the data does tell that story is, for example, the new members, right? What's the cadence of those visits for new members? When are they starting to drop off, right? Are they getting to their first 25 visits? What's happening there? Are they surviving the dip, right? Where, oh, right, I was really excited, and now, I realize this is gonna be a little bit harder than I thought it was. How do we survive that dip? And so the data can definitely help and play a role in all of this, but at the end of the day, I do think it's really the differentiators coming down to the experience, and tying that experience to the result that that person came in for, and that's something that we've done for sure for a long time. That's why this industry even exists in and of itself, but I do think we've gotten away from it a little bit, and part of that is just the competitive nature of the day.
I think you nailed it on the head. I mean, I'm a very big component of experience, and I think a lot of it has to, and we were kind of talking a little bit about it before we hit the record button here and got on. And we're both in tech, and I think tech has a huge role to play. AI,
Mhm.
everything that's out there. But I think this industry in specific, and I mean, I can name a couple few other industries, being in the marketing world and dealing with a lot of different types of businesses at certain times. I've been prone to it too, right? Like, oh, let's just automate everything. Let's just make everything simple. I'm which kind of moves away from the leader mentality, right? Like it's like we're not testing, we're not leading by example, but we need our technology to, funny enough, we need to kind of go backwards 20 years. We need to say, hey, like, how can we leverage this technology but still bring some connection
Mhm.
within our environment and with what we're doing? I had a prospect come to me about, what was it, about 6 months ago when we were talking, and he had 3 locations. He was an investor, so we bought 3 different locations, and
Mhm.
he was underwater like crazy, and he was very desperate. I wish I could have helped him, but he was kind of at that point where, right when we talked about that time when it's like, oh,
Mhm.
now it's time to bring in good employees, good wellness. He's like, I'm cutting all my employees and just making everything completely automated so I
Right.
cut the cost of people. And it's like, but people go to the gym for people. At the end of the day,
Yeah,
that's why
absolutely.
we go there. Yeah, we wanna have
Yeah.
our alone time sometimes, and I wanna go there to celebrate, being around a community with other people, and we're all achieving stuff together. It's that atmosphere, it's that experience, even to the way that the people help me when I need help with certain things. And so, not to get off track, because I could ramble about this for hours. Um,
Absolutely.
that experience, and I think a good start for any studio owner is kind of what you were talking about. Like, let's look at all the touch points we have with people and kind of sit down and look at the data. And I mean, it's the first thing that came off the top of my head was even deeper. Like,
Mhm.
what type of people are in here and how long are they staying? Like that dip that you talked about. It could be something as simple as, oh, we're a yoga studio and we tend to bring in 30 to 40-year-old women, and maybe they become moms and they can't do yoga for 9 months, and so they're
Right.
losing them.
Right,
And
right, right.
that way you could look at the data and say, oh, maybe we have to introduce like a prenatal type yoga
Right.
class,
Right.
and so there's so many different experiences that you can put out there. Why don't you tell people a little bit, because we're kind of talking a lot about the stuff in the industry right now. I want to dive a little bit more into your platform a little bit, and how someone, if they were interested, how they could, like, not just find you. We can mention where they can find you at the end of this
Mhm.
podcast, but how your platform really helps them. Like, what is the main ways that it can help them with where they're at in their studio development?
Yeah, absolutely. So the platform is it's essentially a full scale. So from single studio owner operator all the way up to work with major franchisors that are overseeing hundreds of locations. So at that single studio level, what we're really doing is, we just talked about automation, but we're automating the thing that you could get away with still automating and not lose the human touch, which is reporting, right? So a lot of these things, it's not that the data doesn't exist in your booking platform. We integrate with MindBody. Um, those reports do exist, but essentially automating the pulling of those reports. So 12 to 15 to 20 different reports to go in, do all of that manual work, pull those reports just to get the data, just to then figure out what's going on is where, a lot of the time is taken up. And that's also what leads to people not doing it. Right.
Mhm.
That's what leads to 3 or 4 weeks going by or 6 or 8 weeks going by without, kind of getting all of the reporting that's needed. So we essentially automate pulling all of those reports, bring them into a single dashboard so that studio owners and operators can see exactly what's happening across their conversion funnel. So everything from leads, like I mentioned before, lead to book, book to visited, visited to member. We do it in a very granular way. We're also looking at historical data and things like that. So you know how your marketing is working right now compared to maybe 30 days ago or last quarter or anything like that. And then we get into your full membership growth and retention. So, how many active members do you have? What's your churn? Suspended members, low engagement, at risk, declines, balances, everything's right there. So that you're able to understand the health and performance of your studio in seconds instead of literally hours of pulling all of those reports and trying to figure things out. And then on top of that, we surface a lot of just really granular lists with your members. So, who are those at-risk members to contact? That's pulled out right away, free every day. So you don't have to go searching for those. Who are your all-stars, which is something we don't talk about. Who in your studio is crushing it, right? Like, let's celebrate those people. They are going to your point, they're going to be the ones that are, if you ask them to do just about, anything in service of the brand and the studio, they're going to say yes. They're going to raise their hand. And that could be referrals, that could be community partnerships, that could be Instagram stories, testimonials, case studies, anything like that. So identifying those people, knowing exactly who they are and celebrating them, celebrating your members at every stage. So, track milestones, who's at 25 classes, who's at 100, who's at 1,000, their lifetime value, who's contributing most to your revenue. So there's a lot of different things that we do on the platform. And the real ethos behind it is that everything there has been put there for a reason, right? Everything there drives an action, whether it's from the lead side to the retention side, to your revenue performance, understanding which of your promotions have done well over the last 3 years. We have that full breakdown of revenue by service. We can see attendance by service. All of those things are really granular. And the idea behind it is that, if you're that single studio owner, there's a lot of work that goes into having these studios be, profitable, right? And have that business be what you want it to be and dreamed of it to be. But it's high touch, right? We're talking about 200 to 400 members, small teams. It can easily suck you in every minute of every day, right? So this allows studio owners to take a step back, have everything in one spot, right? Have their team aligned. Team can have access. So you're not having to go pull those reports to give to somebody else. They can just see what's happening right there. Everything's at your fingertips. And really what that allows for is, of course, a massive time savings. But as we've talked about, are just, actionable things that can happen every day without a lot of lag or having to be reactive in your business. And then if we move up, we have what we call our executive dashboard. So if you're operating 60 studios or 600 studios, being able to see all of that, but as a blended view. So we can see all of that for California or for the US or for Canada or for our studios that are in, a specific city, and then drill down to that single studio site. So really, what our goal is to create the most efficient operational environment that we can in boutique, and do that through analytics. And then we also have some automations just to they're operational automations, so just to save time, late cancel fees, booking management, and class scheduling.
And you say you integrate with like MindBody and any of the other calendar apps, or do you guys have your own calendar app that you kind of utilize?
No, so we integrate with the booking platform. So MindBody currently, and hopefully a couple others in 2025 in the new year. But any studio that's running on MindBody, essentially, we can work with and pull into the platform.
Yeah, it's the beauty with us being in the tech side. We do mostly, the website side, the front end marketing side from a more marketing approach. And I tell our prospects all the time, like, hey, like we can go in and we can API at a touch point with any of these platforms. You just you just have to you just have to allow us to, get in there
Yeah,
and work
absolutely.
the fun with it. Well, it was very great to have you on today. I really do appreciate you taking the time out. Why don't you tell everyone, I'll put it down in the comment section of this video cast and in the podcast where they can find you.
Yeah, absolutely. So we are at pipeline-solutions.co. That's our website. You can find me, Tessa Thomas, on LinkedIn as well. I'm very active on there if anyone wants to reach out. And the resource I would definitely suggest people check out would be our high performance studio toolkit, which is honestly, it's packed with really great resources depending on where your bottleneck currently is. So if it's sales, there's resources for sales. If it's retention, if it's average member value, or if it's scaling. If all of those things are great and the next step is for you to open up that second, third, fourth location, or 10th, 11th, 12th, wherever you're at, that toolkit is packed with resources for each stage. And if you don't know what the bottleneck is, the beauty of it is there's essentially a chapter right off the top that will identify where that bottleneck is in your business right now, and then point you to those resources to go solve it.
Beautiful. Well, again, I appreciate having you on, and this is another episode of the Gym Break Cast. Nice visionary session we had here. I really liked hearing everything that you had to say to these studio owners and or managers, and I look forward to keeping the conversation going.
Awesome. Thanks, Zach. Thanks for
Thank
having me.